Tom, we all set? All righty. Good evening. Welcome to the June 19th Village Board Legislative Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Trustee Bazemore?
Present.
Trustee Gazada,
Present.
Mayor Garrity.
Present.
We'll begin this evening with a public hearing in the matter of the application of the Ossing Land LLC for a planned waterfront special permit pursuant to Village Code Sections 270-23I and 270-53.
Corporation Counsel, we received a formal request, and could you please share that?
To adjourn this evening, and in light of the fact that next week we would also, I believe, have a short board. I wonder if my wife should be a member of that short board, but I won't. If she's watching, she'll enjoy that. But if we could put it over to the 16th of July as a date certain to continue the public hearing.
Right, and just
we did get a request from council today requesting an adjournment.
right. So the applicant requested that we hold off, and the next time that we will have a full board, or we anticipate having a full board, is the 16th. We'll be back in this room.
Right.
The next, what?
17th.
17th, thank you.
Right.
So the 17th is our next legislative session when we have a full board, because July 3rd is the fireworks. Everyone join us. We look forward to that, and so we're taking that week off for the holiday week. So it does seem like it's off in the distant future. But I believe that we will have a conversation later this evening in continuing business, because there have been some additional conversations about that particular development.
Yes, there have been, yes.
But that's just a conversation among board and staff, not the public hearing. Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn the public hearing until July 7?
Is anyone here to speak for the public hearing?
Does anybody here wish to address the board on this public hearing? Nope.
Yes.
On this public hearing?
About Hudson Step Development?
Good evening.
Good evening.
With all due respect to the board and all of you, I spoke to you, Mayor, the other day at the church, remember, about
That was about a different
that
property.
was something property
Okay.
that's completely different.
Okay.
Okay. We've addressed that. That's okay.
Okay.
I am here this evening because Ossining has grown on me in a very special way. I came from Peekskill, and I love this place called Ossining. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous. I keep telling the young teenage boys and girls to keep it clean, because this is our town, and we have to take pride of our village. Because if we don't take pride in our village, who will? We have to represent Ossining 100%. And I take pride where I live, because this is my home. And I just want to thank you guys for letting me speak, because I know there have been times where you've been so busy listening to other people's complaints. But it's not just complaints, it's appreciation to our village, to the resources that we have, that we've been given, to being grateful. It's not just complaining, no. It's to be grateful of our village. Not just look at the negative things, look at the positive things. I want to thank you.
Can you state your name, please?
Anicia Lugo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lugo. There's always never a bad time for comments like that. Thank you for your inspirational words. I will just clarify that right now is an opportunity if anyone wants to speak particularly about the proposed Hudson Step development on State Street. If that's what you want to discuss, then please come to the front. Otherwise, if you want to discuss any of the resolutions this evening, then that will be coming up in just a moment. Or if you want to speak about anything generally, that will happen at the end of the meeting. Hudson Step? All right, do we have a motion to, oh, you want to discuss Hudson Step? Welcome.
Good evening. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Good evening. My name is Paul Ingram. I live in Ossining on Harbor Square. And my question is, we was discussing about State Street. So you're talking about the new development that's going up? And I don't have too much information on it.
okay.
So I would like to know exactly, what is going on with that, and will there be any affordable housing and low-income housing in that particular development? Will you be able to expound on that?
I'll let Corporation Counsel address it.
189 planned units, 19 of which will be affordable.
Now, what is the definition of affordable?
Right now, it's 80% AMI.
So you will have to be making X amount of money per year. How much would that X be?
I don't have the chart in front of me, but Trustee Bazemore, do you know offhand?
I want to say like $98,000
For a family of four.
for a family of four. The AMI is about $117,000. About 100% of the AMI.
So you would have to be making, is 96 or
96,
117?
96, 98.
So 96,000 a year you have to make
For a family of four.
for a family of four for that to be affordable. So now in Ossining, we probably have, for a family of four, maybe 50,000. People making 50,000 for a family of four. So what happens to them? They won't be able to afford to go into this affordable housing. Well, will there be any other housing development that will people with $50,000 a year income be able to afford to live? Will there be any future endeavors?
Mr. Ingram, you are raising very important questions that we have discussed in a number of conversations about other developments beyond this one. The proposal for this one began years ago, and the current affordable housing regulation in the village is 10% set aside at the 80% area median income. This board has discussed how can it be more progressive.
Mm-hmm.
We are going out to seek developers to build a development on village property that is much more progressive and much more affordable for people at a variety of income levels. This right now is a public hearing for the Hudson Step development. Wouldn't necessarily delve into that and really answer all your questions adequately. However, that particular question is one of the two items that we were referencing that we want to discuss during continuing business tonight, because it's relevant to a conversation that the planning board will be having at their next meeting. So if you can bear with us until we get to continuing business, I'm going to be asking Corporation Counsel to give us a little more insight into the way that that particular agreement is, or the site plan is drafted at the moment, and what we could consider going forward specifically to the affordability component. So I don't think we're going to have a terribly long meeting, and that's probably going to be the most interesting part. If you can stick with us for a little bit longer, you might get a little more insight. But I do want to be able to tell the public, just for general information about this application, is there someplace on the website that we can direct people to so they can see the applications?
Yes, if they go to the planning department page, there will be documents that relate to Hudson Step. They will have the application, the current application before the planning board. If they go to the zoning board page, they'll have the application before the zoning board. Also under our State Environmental Quality Review Act page, which is part of the planning board page, we have all of the filed documents that were provided by Hudson Step back in 2014, 2015 with regard to their environmental reviews of that project.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to speak specifically to Hudson Step?
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't
Welcome.
sure, but since, good evening, Mayor Garrity, Board of Trustees, and everyone else. The statement that I wanted to make
You want to
was
state
about,
your name?
please? Oh, my name is Sheila Vereen Massengale, and I'm a resident of Ossining. The statement that I wanted to make was about affordable housing also. I'm sure you know that we lack truly affordable housing in Ossining. So my question is just where is the housing, the truly affordable housing for the people in the community? And are there projects that are projects that you're working on buildings that are being done? I know about the one on State Street. I heard that there were a few apartments there, but that's not enough. Are there projects that are coming in the future for people, for the residents here? Because there's truly no affordable housing. And I just wanted to address it.
Okay, absolutely. And we have a theme that's going here this evening where we've veered a little bit away from the public hearing on this property, but it is something that's top of mind and a topic of discussion right now among the board and perhaps village manager. DeTore, could you give folks a little bit of an insight into the plan that I was referencing before for seeking developers for the public property known as the DPW site, which is going to be a different approach than we've had to private development?
Yes, so currently the village owns properties that can be developed, and we will be looking. A few months ago, there was a public hearing. We had people from New York State Homes and Community Renewals, and they are the primary funders in New York State for affordable housing projects. So we talked about what we could do on those village-owned properties. So we will be looking to, we're going to be issuing a request for qualifications for developers who specialize in doing mixed use, mixed income housing, which would allow for, at this particular site, significant number of homes from very low income to low income, moderate income. So it would be a mix of different income levels, but it provides much greater number of units, and I'm thinking probably somewhere between 80 and 100 depending on the site plan, and again at various levels of income, so really providing the best reach possible for the lowest income housing that we can do within those the restrictions of the tax credit program. But that definitely is a primary goal.
So you're saying that the buildings that are coming may have, what you said, 80 units?
So there's one particular project we're looking at the DPW site, which is down on Water Street.
Mm-hmm.
So there, it's zoned for, I think, a maximum of 109 units. So it's going to depend on how the building's designed, whether there's a community-based sort of business or community center component. So my guess is that the project will be somewhere between 80 and 100 plus units, but it will definitely be a significant number of units that would exceed what we can typically do with our market rate set aside program.
One more question. Would anyone that is protected with ETPA, would they be allowed to go in one of those buildings? If it's, because I know it's, now you're saying that with the ETPA law it's 21 units or more. So would someone who is protected by ETPA, would they be able to go in that building? The building has to be ETPA?
Well, the building would not be ETPA because the rents would be set already. They'd be subsidized already.
Okay.
So I don't know all the details of the new legislation, but it in a sense it's a rent control building by default. So the period of affordability is a minimum of, I think, 30 years. It can be up to 50 or even in perpetuity. So the affordability is set within the units themselves. So the same way that you would apply for any other type of affordable housing, you would have to meet the requirements based on the income levels that are available in that building. But anybody could apply, and if they currently live in an ETPA apartment, they can, and they decide to move, they would be afforded comfort of knowing that they have a stable rent.
Thank you, Ms. Masenkiel. And since the topic of ETPA was raised, and just to clarify for the public, ETPA protections are tied to the age and size of a building, not to the income of the person in that unit,
right.
Whereas these units would be tied to the income level of the people who apply to live in them.
Yes,
Different.
correct.
Good
Welcome.
evening, Rosalind Knowles Farrell Ossining. I have a question with regards to the impact that the buildings that's going to be built will have on the surrounding neighborhoods as far as James Street, as far as traffic is concerned, and what is that plan? Is there a record of that? How that's going to affect the neighborhoods there?
That was considered by both the planning board and the zoning board,
Mhm.
both at the initial application back in 2014, 2015, and most recently. The minutes of those meetings are online and can be obtained,
Okay.
as well as the traffic studies that were done in the past as well.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Stewart,
Can
Stewart,
you state your name, please?
Rosalind Knowles Farrell.
Thank you.
Yes, trustee.
how many parking spaces for this particular project again?
I believe they're providing, I think it's 249, 236, which are underground, and 13 which will be on ground.
Is the entrance of the self-parking garage still on Hunter Street?
No, there's actually no entrance off of Hunter Street.
Okay.
No, there's no entrance.
So,
off of Hunter.
so on what street would they be
I
turning
believe
in?
it's off of James.
Off of James?
Yep, I believe so. I would have to double check because it
Okay.
may be, but it's definitely not Hunter.
Okay.
That's for certain.
No, I believe we have one more. Welcome.
Mr. Susan Hendricks. I live on James Street. I don't know what planning board went and if you have seen James Street and where that structure is more geared towards the dead end part of James Street, where there's already 2 apartment buildings, private housing. I don't know how 200 and something cars or more, because you have 189 units. I'm sure everybody living in there is going to have more than 1 or 2 cars. How anyone looked at that and thought that that type of traffic coming into that street when we can't even barely park on the street now. So I think that that really needs to be reviewed and looked at again, because it's impossible.
Reverend, I may be misspeaking in terms of where the cars are entering onto, but I can tell you it was looked at by the planning board in 2014, zoning board, and again this year by all
Okay,
boards. So what I would say to you also is you can look at the traffic studies that were done, because they're all there in terms of where the traffic would be. And it was also looked at because it was requested with regard to the new Ossining Children's Center that's going in. So I understand. What I may be incorrect is exactly where they're going to be entering and exiting off of. I just know that there will be 236 underground and 13 above ground for a total of 249.
No, I understand that. And from the very beginning, when I first heard about it going up, it never made sense, either James Street or Hunter Street, because neither one of those streets, and I don't know who the zoning board is and what they looked at and all the traffic and all that stuff, and hey, you go out there, and because I live there, if I didn't live there, then I could say, okay, the zoning board went out and they looked at it, but I live there. And so I look at the mess that's over there now that doesn't get cleaned up, but I look at it every day. And I know I can't even park in front of my own house because the people who live in the apartment building park where I live. So what I'm saying is, if we can't park on the street now, it's one side of the street parking. The zoning board needs to go back out there and actually look at it again. You could tell me they went, but I'm saying because I live there, then I know how much traffic, and that's too much traffic to either enter or exit, to have that volume of traffic on that road. So
that's why I said I apologize. I may be incorrect that it's exiting onto James.
No, I'm
Street.
saying entrance or exit.
But I'm saying it may not be from that street. And I invite you again to just look at the study that was done. I understand you live there, but I also want to make it clear that when the application first came up in 2014, there were 9 months of hearings.
Okay, but there were 9 months of hearings. I don't mean to.
And there were public notices
But I don't.
to everybody.
Okay, I'm telling you that public notices didn't come to my house. They didn't come to my father. I'm just saying that's a senior citizen. So we cannot assume that everyone is on Facebook, social media, and all that stuff that would get these kind of notices. So if you are not mailing things, because like I said, everybody's not on social media. They're not on there. So if you don't mail things out to the people who actually live on the streets and neighborhoods, because you have older senior citizens that live on these streets who did not get notices in the mail to say that this is what's going on and able to come to the hearings. And like I said, because I live on the street, then I know the type of traffic that goes back and forth up and down James Street. And so for that to be an entrance or an exit, that is too much traffic on the street because I live there. So, I mean, you've already made a decision on what you're going to do, but I just think you need to hear from the people who actually live on the street so they can voice what's actually going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to speak particularly about Hudson Step? Please, welcome. It is.
Hi, Linda A. Question. I'm boggled by all this information. This is Ossining Land LLC, a public hearing?
Yes.
Okay. You said there's gonna be 249 parking spaces?
Yes.
I lost track. How many apartments?
189.
If memory serves me right, it's supposed to have 1.5 parking.
Not in that zone, Linda.
What zone is that?
PWB.
Okay, PWD, okay. Now that woman brought up a good point that not everybody's on social media. Isn't there somewhere in a law that when something's going to be happening at a neighbor's house, doesn't something have to be sent to the homes within 500 feet of the property?
Yes, and that was done here.
That was done.
Yes.
This is a learning experience for me. So on this property, do they have adequate, was it 189? What's half of 189? Half of 190.
25?
Oh, they're above the parking spaces they need. That's good. I can understand how this woman feels, but he said they sent something in the mail. Because I remember some things, not everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, we're totally off script now, so go ahead.
The parking lot, the parking,
Yes.
is that, where would be the entrance and the exit
I
location?
just
Okay,
indicated
so-
to the Reverend I was not certain.
Mr. Ingram, thank you.
But my question
Oh.
also was, with the parking lot, would there be one way in, one way out?
So
Alright, so-
Trustee Quesada just looked up the map while we were talking about it, so that's what I was going to say. We might have a little bit
Because if
better
there's an
insight.
exit or entrance on,
So if I may, so it's kind of hard to see from my phone, but it seems to be by looking at the site plan that we have online under the village
Yes.
planner's office. It seems that there's two entrances, one on James and one on State. And then the parking lot itself is actually underground.
right.
So there's this whole system that that was explained to us a while back, and also as part of the planning board minutes, where you literally go in and the car goes into the ground by it's a computerized system.
Thank you.
There's a lot of documents online that you'll be able to find.
Thank you.
Stuart, I have one last question.
Sure.
Were there notices sent out the last time that the planning board reviewed this particular project?
Yes.
I'm really glad that there were so many questions raised tonight and that so many people are here. It points to a number of areas where we could improve in our communications. I also want to clarify that the hearing that we have for this board is for a very narrow scope of the piece of this approval process. Most of it is handled by the planning board and by the zoning board of appeals. Communication that goes out by mail, I'm sure that people are doing as they say they are and they're required to do. But I do think that something we have discussed in the village that would have helped in this situation and perhaps could help in future development would be to have signage at the location. There was a lawn sign at that location. People who live on that block would see it every day. That's something we have discussed. I would really like to see happen. And I'm sorry that you weren't given, that it wasn't made more clear to people, because at this stage, coming to us is not as effective as a couple months ago going to the planning board, because they're actually the decision-making body for the vast majority of this project. But I'm very glad that you're here, and we are going to pick up on the theme of affordability in a number of other ways this evening. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Do we have a motion to adjourn this public hearing to our next legislative session, which will be July 17th?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Next item on our agenda is mayor's and trustees announcements.
Anybody have announcements?
So I just want to acknowledge that June 19th, 1985 is the day that African Americans celebrate Juneteenth. This is the day that the formerly enslaved persons found out in Galveston, Texas that they were free. So this is a very important day for many people in the African American community.
Thank you. I'll just update folks on a couple of things that have been going on in village government. You didn't have
No.
anything, Trustee Casada? Last week, Village Manager DeTore and I attended another workshop, continuing with our theme of learning everything we possibly can about grants, state money that we might be able to bring here to help further our big picture goals for the village. This one is a new approach that New York State has for workforce development. There's a new workforce development initiative that we were learning about. We're not yet at a stage where we're ready to capitalize on this, but it was a very helpful first step. And anytime we have an opportunity to learn from and meet with the decision-making folks at the Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council, it's a valuable use of time for us in the village. And there's a couple of different pathways that we may be able to move forward on, some of which have been discussed here in the village. I know we began discussions a year ago. We may turn to discussions, and this may be an avenue for us to do some more real tangible workforce development investment in our community as we figure out this new approach that New York State is offering. We're going to remind everybody next Wednesday, no, 2 Wednesdays from now, we will not have a village board meeting. It'll be July 3rd. We'll be down at the waterfront with a few thousand of our best buddies. We hope that you're there. It's always a great time down at the Ossining waterfront on July 3rd. And we also want to thank everyone who came out to our kickoff for the comprehensive plan meeting that was held in the library a couple of weeks back. There was dozens of people turned out. It was a really positive, constructive workshop to talk about how we can engage the community going forward. We've had a little bit of a delay. Trustee Bazemore and I were anticipating having a follow-up conference call with our consultants that we're working with at PACE Land Use, and that had to be delayed. That was supposed to be last Monday, and now we have rescheduled it for the coming week. And the outcome of that will be that we will be appointing the steering committee, which will help us guide the next steps of this project, and really figuring out how can we continue to do an increasingly better job at engaging the community. We were thoroughly impressed that 60 people showed up in the library at 7 o'clock in the evening to talk about a comprehensive plan, which is really a pretty dry document in our community, and I think it speaks to how much people care about this village and what the future of Ossining looks like. So thank you for everybody for being there. Whether you were there or not for that meeting, there will be many, many, many more opportunities to weigh in and participate in this process, which is probably going to be at least a year long, and then we'll be updating our zoning regulations to reflect the vision that we have for the future of Ossining. So, Madam Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So I am halfway into my second week here as Village Manager of Ossining, and I'd like to acknowledge the staff who has been enormously helpful in supporting me and helping me get up to speed. I've been able to meet with all the department heads individually. I have a good sense of where they are, where they want to go, and we're starting to really look at how we can make sure that the goals and objectives of each department and the collective goals and objectives of the village are actualized in both the immediate goals and our long-range goals, but a lot of things going on here. So we're very happy. I'm very happy to be here, and it was really great getting to know everybody, even though I knew some people, but now I've gotten to know everybody a lot better. And we are gearing up for this year's consolidated funding application. And this funding can be used to finance some of our existing projects as well as projects we may have in development and help us with technical skills and consulting. So we will be applying for that funding, and we are hopeful that we receive some. I was also able to participate in a call with the Downtown Development Fund Council about the Little Big Ossining initiative. And this is an initiative that's based on helping to keep our village clean. And we discuss ways we can better engage the community and youth in activities and programs to keep our village clean and to maintain the vision we all have for our community that I think Ms. Lugo articulated so well. We do have a lot to be grateful for. Today we also had a meeting with village and town staff to discuss Ossining Day at Playland Park, which will be on August 7th. And on this date, there will be all-day discounts for Ossining residents at Playland in Rye with free admission to the beach and the pool. And be on the lookout for Coaster the Dragon, who will be making an appearance prior to this summer in the village and the town. And we will be promoting this event with Coaster. So look for Coaster. It'll be fun. And another fun thing, Ossining camps start in 18 days. The Ossining Recreation Department still has some slots open. So if you have somebody who needs to do something fun this summer, check out what slots may be available, and you can apply on the Village of Ossining Recreation website. More good news, the Broadway Bridge is nearing completion. The structural components are complete, and right now they're working on putting overhead utilities underground with the goal of removing as many of the above ground utility poles to really enhance the aesthetic of the area and the double arches. And we're on track to have the bridge open before this winter. Additionally, paving has been completed and the streets have been lined on Underhill and Ogden roads. So that's pretty much the last week and a half. Thank you.
Thank you.
Corporation Counsel Stuart Kahan.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Good evening, members of the board. A few scheduling matters first. The planning board meeting for next week, which is Tuesday, June the 25th, will be held at Village Hall in the boardroom. So if you're planning to go to that, it will be changed because next Tuesday is also primary election day, and the operations center is a polling station. So for the planning board meeting next week, again, that will be held at Village Hall in the boardroom next week. Also next week on Thursday night, there will be a work session of the Historic Preservation Commission specifically to discuss the Hidden Cove project and the proposal to dismantle the existing office building, which remains on site. It will be a work session, so it'll be primarily the discussion by board members, but the public is invited to attend and certainly are welcome to attend. Last week, Trustee Herrera mentioned that the legislature was about to pass significant legislation with regard to rent stabilization and tenants' rights. That legislation, which is entitled, I had it here and I just lost it, okay, was in fact passed last week. The Statewide Housing Security and Tenant Protection Act of 2019 was passed last Thursday and was signed by the governor the same day. A significant part of that legislation changes significantly the Emergency Tenant Protection Act. One important thing is that rent stabilization is now a permanent part of the landscape in the state of New York. It will not have a sunset provision, which it has had in the past. There are other changes with regard to how rent increases can be calculated. The prior, what used to be known as vacancy decontrol, is no longer permitted in the state of New York. But significantly, the act also includes numerous changes to New York's real property law that relate to all tenants, not just tenants who are in rent-stabilized units. And for example, it includes new provisions prohibiting certain retaliatory action taken by landlords against tenants. Landlords must now provide notice of rent increases or non-renewal in certain circumstances, and they are given a time period within which to do that. Importantly, a landlord is now obligated to mitigate damages. Essentially, if a tenant leaves the apartment during the period of the lease, the landlord is now required to take a good faith action to either rent the premises at fair market value or at the rate agreed to during the term of the tenancy, whichever is lower. And once that lease is in effect, or the new lease is in effect, the former tenant's obligation to pay any further rent is ended. And that is in effect right now, as a matter of fact. Further, a landlord is no longer permitted to refuse to rent or offer a lease to a potential tenant on the basis that that tenant was involved in a past landlord-tenant proceeding. And if that information, and so the landlord can no longer request information from either a tenant screening bureau or search the court records to see if the potential tenant has in fact brought such an action. That can result in an action. If the landlord is found to have done that, the Attorney General has a right of a civil action, which can result in penalties of up to $1,000. That does not go into effect until July the 15th. One thing that is particularly important for many tenants in Ossining who have what are called month-to-month tenancies, which is where you do not have a lease that goes for longer than a month. In the past, it used to be that both the landlord and the tenant could, on 30 days' notice, cancel or terminate the month-to-month tenancy. Under the change in the statute, now only the tenant can terminate a month-to-month tenancy, and there must be notice given at least 30 days before. That is effective October 12th of this year. So there are differences back and forth. There are other changes that, again, affect all different tenants. Some affect in terms of what kind of fees a landlord can collect, and also in terms of when a non-payment proceeding can begin. It used to be it was a 3-day notice. It is now a 14-day notice, so there is more time to notify the tenant. There are also provisions for when a judgment is issued directing a tenant to get out. It's called a warrant that is issued. The court is now able to issue a stay of the warrant for up to 1 year. And among the considerations that the court can look at for extreme hardship is that a child may be in the local school and it may simply not be feasible for that tenant to take the child out of that school and find another location within the same jurisdiction or the same school district. So there are many, many different changes here. One also deals with unlawful evictions, and there's some fairly significant penalties for that of anywhere between $1,000 and $10,000 for each violation. I have sent my memo on this to the Landlord Tenant Council, and they will be coming out with some documentation to also notify both landlords and tenants of these changes. And again, they're important because they affect all tenants, not just tenants that are in rent-stabilized buildings. Most of those go into effect immediately, some in July, some in October, but they effectively change the landscape as relates to landlord-tenant relations in New York State. And since we have so many folks in Ossining who are tenants, just want to obviously make them aware of that. And also, as many of you may know, the state did pass the green light legislation, which was signed by the governor. And I know that the chief was involved with some of the discussions on that. That goes into effect in 180 days and will allow folks who are not documented in the United States to obtain driver's licenses in New York. They will still have to provide certain types of documentation to get that. It could be a passport, could be a consul letter, it could be a driver's license from their prior location, even if that license is expired for up to 24 months. The Department of Motor Vehicles will be putting together all those procedures, but again, that goes into effect in 6 months. New York, I believe, becomes the 12th or 13th state to have that legislation. The legislation in New York is different than the other states because it has significant protections against providing this information for purposes of immigration. So that's not what you see in the other states because many of those legislative laws were passed prior to 2016. But there are numerous provisions in this in terms of how that information can be used, who it can get to, and when it can be released, and in many cases only under a court order. So that's another significant change, which I'm sure we'll be hearing more about. Thank you.
I just want to pick up on something. Thank you for mentioning the green light legislation that passed. That's something that this board has been very supportive of for going on 3 years now since we made our first public statement in support of it, and I'm delighted that it's in place. I do want to clarify for anyone, there's been some questions and misinformation, and we're trying to get accurate information out there for folks. New York is now the 13th state, as you mentioned, to have this in place. So there's a lot of examples that the New York State legislators were able to learn from. What this does is it enables anyone, regardless of immigration status, to be eligible to apply for a driver's license so that they can take a test like anybody else and demonstrate that they understand the rules of the road, and then for them to pay insurance, which helps all of us on the road. And I want to clarify what it does not do. You do not have the right to vote simply because you have a driver's license. That's always been the case. There are plenty of people here who are documented immigrants and already have driver's licenses in New York State. That does not make you eligible to vote. You must be a U.S. citizen, which is a whole nother kettle of fish to discuss if there's a pathway to citizenship, and that is a federal government decision. Driver's license is a state government decision. So, but it obviously has significant implications for many people in our community. And I'm very grateful that Chief Sylvester was one of the leaders in law enforcement who acknowledged the reasons why it is in law enforcement's interest for there to be driver's licenses for all, regardless of immigration status. So thank you very much for speaking out on that, Chief Sylvester, when you did, as the legislation was being considered. Not right now. Not right now. Not right now. Not right now. Madam Clerk.
Police Chief Kevin Sylvester.
Good evening. It's been a busy week with a lot of calls, so just a reminder to everybody that to get information about what's going on when you hear lots of sirens, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Nixle, Nextdoor, and Snapchat. For those not following along, yesterday we had an incident where a resident responded to headquarters and reported to us that she had what she believed was a hand grenade in her car. Thankfully, that was determined to be an inert object. It was found when searching through a deceased grandparent's property. Just a reminder to folks that if you find something dangerous, call us. We'll come take a look at it, or find somebody who's specialized in doing such a thing. Please do not pick up dangerous objects and bring them to the police station. This week, we're undergoing our 5-year New York State Law Enforcement Accreditation Program assessment, so we're busy at work with that. Lieutenant Damiano and Sergeant Donahue are busy at work and have that well in hand, but that is our primary objective this week, is to get through that. As soon as that's done, we'll have our first movies in the park Friday night in Nelson Park, 8 p.m. We'll be watching Moana, so please join us for that. As always, that is a free program. And just a reminder to folks that fireworks are coming, so please keep an eye on all of our messaging for that, so we can make sure that everybody parks in a safe place and is able to get to work and home from work and to the fireworks and enjoy the show in a safe and efficient manner. That's all for tonight.
Terrific. Thank you.
Organization announcements. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board on any organization announcements?
Welcome.
You let that gentleman get up twice, maybe 3 times. I had one simple question about a driver's license. Simple. I'm going to ask you
Go ahead,
now.
please.
Don't you need a social security card to get a driver's license these days?
Please, Corporation Counsel, can you explain that?
I can answer Ms. Mangano that under this
Linda.
Under this legislation, if someone does not have a social security number, they can provide an affidavit that they do not have a social security number. That will be accepted by DMV as part of the process. That's
Because
actually
I
in the
was
law.
corrected, DMV used to require it.
Right, but
Okay.
in this case, that will not be.
Okay, thank you for explanation. Organization meetings. First and foremost, I want to welcome Karen Diatori. I think she's an excellent choice, and I hope you last more than 5 years. Good choice. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't practice law, but can read and understand the laws. An awful lot of money. I'm still a passion with parking tickets. I want to start a new community group relative to parking tickets, like we had a few years ago. Law indicates that there are 5 things on a parking ticket that must be included and be accurate. If a ticket is ineligible, you just ask the judge, dismiss it, and by law it should be dismissed if it's ineligible or it's missing any of these 5 important things. just ask the judge to dismiss it. If you're interested in joining this group that's newly founded, I can be reached at ossining@bestweb.net. The police continue to write out erroneous tickets. I saw it just last week. I've gotten over 500 tickets dismissed for people. Here is just one batch of tickets from over the years, errors on them, and they got dismissed by the judge for various reasons. There is a way to train these police officers to write tickets properly. I checked last week and they're dismissing tickets. They're not dismissing tickets. It's just never getting to ComPlus that the dates are written. The officer didn't sign it. The violation on the left-hand side is not checked off. This is something that's fixable. And what I saw going on in front of me,
Your time is up.
oh, he's got
It's a gentle ding
he's
now.
got a new one now.
Yes, it's a gentle one.
Anyway, may I finish this last sentence?
Last sentence, please.
I watched as approximately 30% of the tickets, the pink copy and the white copy, never got to ComPlus. That's $900. Figure $30 a ticket, 90 tickets, whatever.
Thank you.
We're losing money.
I hear
And
you.
I've been nagging this board, or every board, for how many years? Nobody wishes to listen.
Thank you.
But somebody's got to train the police officers to write them properly, or better yet, get the handheld ticket writers.
Got it. Thank you. Is there anybody else with an organizational announcement?
Village Board resolutions. Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board on any of the resolutions this evening?
Welcome.
I don't like
This
it.
is 4
4
minutes.
minutes for 11 resolutions. Resolution B, special meeting, Board of Police Commissioners. I'm pretty astute with this village law. Man, I was very confused. You had a meeting on June 12th. Something to do with a police officer charged somebody else with, I don't know, sexual harassment, but I couldn't care less. I filed a civilian complaint on May 22nd. I sent it to around 10 government people, and not one has gotten back to me. Today I learned that this civilian complaint, which I think it should be civilian complaint and compliment, because last board meeting, you might recall, you didn't shut me up, and I complimented quite a few officers. We got some really damn good ones. But it disturbs me to see a police officer on his cell phone in the courtroom. There's a sign out there, no cell phones. I watched a prisoner come in here in handcuffs. One officer, Proctor, was standing right here to the guy's right, and the other officer stood in that alcove all the while the defendant in handcuffs was here, and he was on his cell phone. You know, all of you know I'm opposed to cell phones. I don't have one, I don't want one. It disturbs me that the same officer sits on the table in the lobby. His behind is on the table, playing on his cell phone. I don't know what he's doing there. When he's supposed to be searching people who are entering. Officer Andrew Pavone, badge number 130, I think, has been derelict in his police duties, and instead of trying to quell a problem, escalates it. Further, he called me a jerk. Officer Pavone's behavior is contradictory to many police rules and regulations. In my opinion, he doesn't have the personality to be a cop. When is the next civilian complaint board meeting? Because my complaint from May 22nd has not been addressed by any of the 10 or 12 people I sent it to.
Thank you for your comments. I'm not sure when the next Civilian Police Complaint Review Board meeting is happening, and I do not know exactly where this would be
June
in the process.
26th.
Okay, and it would be reviewed by, I don't know where this is in the process, if it's being reviewed or
It's a
what.
personnel issue that I don't think would normally be discussed at a public meeting, but I can tell you the next meeting of the Civilian Complaint Review Board is scheduled for June 26th.
I'd also like to add to this. I came in here on not what date. My neighbor hit my car by accident. He told me. The next day I came in, it was in the middle of the night, he hit my car. Next day I came in to file a police report. Officer Pavone I got stuck with. I'm not very happy with him. He says, what's your neighbor's plate number? I don't know. What do I know? But he's got computers. You could plug in the name Daniel Proctor at 2 Walden Road and get the name. But he wasn't very nice to me. I have his police report here, and it contains a fib, an absolute fib. He wrote in it, at approximately 1730 hours, Ms. Mangano notified this agency via telephone that she no longer wished a motor vehicle accident report be entered and that the matter has been resolved. That is untruthful.
Linda A., I must say that it sounds like you have some very specific concerns that need to be addressed, that I think we have veered quite far from the resolutions this evening.
Well,
which
I'm
you're
talking about the
commenting on.
police commission, board, whatever the hell your board is, whatever the heck your board is, excuse me.
And I can tell you that what you're discussing right now is not related to the resolutions this evening.
Well,
But thank you.
is it the police commission, you're the police, what's the name of the board?
The Board of Police Commissioners, which is
Okay.
what we serve as
And
well.
you guys don't handle civilian complaints.
What you are suggesting right now is specific and should be addressed, but it is not.
Should
This
be
is not the
addressed
forum
by
for it.
whom?
I don't have enough information to tell you that, but it is.
If I file a civilian complaint and send it to 12 people, including Chief Kevin Sylvester, shouldn't I hear from somebody of 10 or 12 people, we received it?
That is a very reasonable expectation. I agree.
I haven't
You
heard
should
since
get
May
confirmation of
22nd.
receipt at the very
And I'm
least.
bringing it up, Mayor Garrity,
Thank you.
because over here it says, you guys had a meeting on June 12th. So I spoke to Stuart and I want to know, why wasn't this taken care of? Nobody called me.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm very upset with Officer Pavone. He's not a very nice person. He's quite rude.
We have heard. I've heard your concerns. Thank you.
And he shouldn't be on the telephone while there's a prisoner here.
We've heard your concerns. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Holiday.
Madam Clerk.
So we'll move into our board resolutions. Letter A, approval of minutes dated June 5th, 2019. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby approves the minutes of the June 5th, 2019 regular meeting as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board. Madam Clerk.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter B, approval of special meeting Board of Police Commissioners minutes dated June 12, 2019. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby approves the minutes of the June 12, 2019 Board of Police Commissioners special meeting as presented. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board. Madam Clerk.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter C, approval voucher detail report dated June 19, 2019. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby approves the voucher detail report dated June 19, 2019 in the amount of $879,158.27. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
On the board. Madam Clerk.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter D, resolution authorizing the village manager to execute Amendment B to the 2018-2019 Index Snow and Ice Agreement with New York State. Resolved that the village manager is authorized to execute Amendment B to the 2018-19 Index Lump Sum Snow and Ice Agreement with the New York State Department of Transportation, Contract D009784, to increase the total state reimbursement to the village for the 2018-19 winter season from the original estimate of $24,984 to $39,374.78, an increase of $14,390.78. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board. Madam Clerk.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Finance budget modification, Nelson Park Basketball Court Lighting Capital Project in 2019. Whereas by resolution dated April 17, 2019, the Board of Trustees established a capital project in the amount of $220,000 to resurface 3 village basketball courts, and whereas the village now wishes to increase the scope of work to include the relighting of Nelson Park Basketball Court with LED lights, now therefore be it resolved, the 2019 basketball court resurfacing capital project budget is increased by $57,405 for the additional scope of LED lighting work at Nelson Park Basketball Court to be funded with monies from the recreation fees from developers in lieu of Parkland Deposit Special Purpose Trust, and be it further resolved that said capital project is renamed as Basketball Courts Resurfacing Lighting Capital Project to reflect the revised scope of the work to be done, and now aggregating $277,405 as follows. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I just want to thank Superintendent Garrison. Bill Garrison was with us at our last work session to talk about this, and what we're doing formally is expanding the capital project to not just be basketball court resurfacing, but in the case of Nelson Park, to fix the lighting. The lighting, there's lighting there, but it's been not functioning properly for quite some time. And so this $57,000 is going to not just upgrade it to be LED lights, but it's actually going to fix the electric problem that exists there. So that'll be particularly beneficial when it starts getting dark earlier in the evening. So we'll be able to have basketball. In fact, Bill Garrison was talking about doing basketball tournaments in the early fall when it's still nice out in the evening, but it does get dark early. So we look forward to that coming to fruition in the coming months. Madam Clerk.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter F, resolution authorizing tax certiorari payment for 49 Spring Street, Friends Construction Incorporated. Whereas certain tax certiorari proceedings were instituted against the assessor of the Town of Ossining, Board of Assessment Review of the Town of Ossining, and the Ossining Union Free School District by 204 Spring Street Associates, LLC, to review the assessment against petitioner's property situated at 49 Spring Street in the Village of Ossining and designated as Section 89.19, Block 4, Lot 83 for the 2012, 2013, 2014, and 15 assessment years, which proceedings were commenced in the Supreme Court of the State of New York, Westchester County, under index numbers 66240-2012, 66018-2013, 66409-2014, and 67165-2015. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining, upon certification by the village treasurers that all the aforesaid taxes have been paid, hereby authorizes and directs the village treasurer to make the payment of such refund of real property taxes due to Friends Construction, Inc., to Paul S. Richmond, Esquire, as attorney and agent for the petitioner, as required by said consent judgment, and be it further resolved that the village treasurer is authorized to make the aforesaid payment so the village may avoid the payment of any penalties, and be it further resolved that the village treasurer shall make a notation in the margin of the assessment rolls of the Village of Ossining that said assessments were reduced and payment of a refund of the overpayment of real property taxes were made pursuant to said judgment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board? Madam Clerk.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter G, resolution authorizing the village manager to sign a lease agreement with Marlene Matute, the owner of 16 Sarah Street. Whereas Marlene Matute, is the owner of property in the Village of Ossining, having a street address of 16 Sarah Street and tax map designation of 89.15-4-51 property, adjacent to which a portion of the right-of-way owned and held for the benefit of the public by the Village of Ossining, the licensed premises. And whereas Marlene Matute performed certain work within the licensed premises consisting of landscaping, staircase, which work was performed without the knowledge or consent of the village. And whereas the village learned of the work upon reviewing certain submitted plans for the property, and whereas the owner seeks to enter into a license agreement with the Village of Ossining to use and maintain the licensed premises, acknowledging the village's ownership of the licensed premises and the village's right to enter the licensed premises, now therefore be it resolved that upon review by the Corporation Council, the village manager is authorized to sign a license agreement with Marlene Matute, the owner of 16 Sarah Street. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I'll just comment. It's unfortunate that we were so easily able to figure out how to handle this, because we just had a very similar case just a number of weeks ago. And in both instances, it had to do with somebody at the edge of their property line doing something with a staircase or a retaining wall, and actually where they thought they were on their property, but they were really on village property. So not on the sidewalk, but they hadn't looked carefully at their survey, or the person who did the work didn't look carefully at the survey. So now they retroactively have to sort of be accountable for that. And since it's public property, if there were ever a cause for the village to need to access that property, it's their responsibility to remove the stairs or the wall and then replace it themselves appropriately as necessary. Hopefully that won't happen. And really what we hope is that in the future, if you're doing any work on your property, that you check with the building department and make sure that you're doing it truly on your property and you get all the permits that you need to in advance instead of us having to do these things retroactively. Any other comments on this?
Yes. Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong. The last time that we passed something very similar to this, did we put the amount on this?
I don't, no, you know what, I took it off of, I used the 35 Washington template. So I
Okay.
don't believe we put the amount is in the agreement.
In the
license
agreement.
Yes,
Okay. All right.
And it's $1,500?
$1,500.
$1,500. Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Madam Clerk?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter H, resolution authorizing the village manager to sign contract documents for life insurance coverage and authorizing village treasurer to pay required premium to effect coverage. Resolved that the village manager of the Village of Ossining is hereby authorized to execute the necessary documents to enter into a contract with AXA Equitable Life Insurance Company for life insurance coverage for the village's full-time employees beginning June 1st, 2019. Such documents being subject to review and approval by Corporation Council, and be it further resolved that the village treasurer is authorized to pay the required premium to effect coverage. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board? Madam Clerk?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Mayor,
Letter,
if I can just,
Please.
sorry, if I just let the board know. This is with a different life insurance company. It will be the same coverage as we've had before, but it will be a savings of 8 cents per employee, which will amount to approximately $300 per monthly premium savings over the term of the policy. So
How
that's
long
why
is
we
the,
want to go with them.
now that you opened that door, how long is the policy?
It's
Typically.
I believe it's a 1-year policy, but I believe the rates remain in effect for 2 years. I believe that's what it said in their offering sheet.
Okay. $300 a month, 12 months. That's a little bit of savings. We'll take it. Thank you. Madam Clerk?
okay, Fire Department appointment, Monitor Hose Company number 4. Resolved that upon the recommendation of the Fire Chief, William Rettenberg, Ossining, New York, was elected active member of Monitor Hose Company number 4 for interior firefighting at their regular meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board? Madam Clerk?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter J, Fire Department, Washington, Hook and Ladder number 2, removal from active roles. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby removes Vincenzo Loja from the active roles of the Ossining Fire Department, Washington, Hook and Ladder Company number 2. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Comments on the board? Madam Clerk?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter K, Fire Department, Washington, Hook and Ladder Company number 2, removal from active roles. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby removes Omi Ibarra from active roles of the Ossining Fire Department, Washington, Hook and Ladder Company number 2. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Letter L, Fire Department, Washington, Hook and Ladder Company number 2, removal from active roles. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby removes Jose De Silva from the active roles of the Ossining Fire Department, Washington, Hook and Ladder Company number 2. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Comments on the board? Madam Clerk?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'd just like to say welcome to Deputy Mayor Levin, who was not able to join us for the start of the meeting, but she's here just in time for continuing business. Thanks. So, go ahead, Madam Clerk. I'm sorry, I
Okay.
jumped in there.
Continuing business of the board.
We do have an item today. We are going to continue our discussion of cuts and step. There are 2 particular items that we wanted to discuss in anticipation of next week's planning board meeting, which thank you, Corporation Council, for alerting everyone to the fact that next week's planning board meeting is taking place on Tuesday evening. And because it is an election day, it is there's a Democratic primary for anybody who's a registered Democrat in Westchester County. You can vote. And if your polling place is the Operations Center, that's where you should be. And if you want to be at the planning board meeting next week, you should be at Village Hall.
That's correct.
Great. So there were 2 particular items. Could you give us some, frame that for us, please, Corporation Council?
Absolutely. Mayor, thank you. At the prior planning board meeting, which would have been the May 28th meeting, the planning board gave site plan and conditional permit approval to the Hudson Step plan. And what is next in the process is the drafting of the resolution, which will in large part follow the February 2015 resolution. But one of the things that this board has discussed and was discussed by the planning board is that the applicant was getting various density bonuses which are permitted in this particular zone. And one of the density bonuses that he was utilizing related to LEED certification. And LEED is basically, it's environmentally sensitive for your buildings. I apologize, I forget what the acronym stands for. But in the Planning Board's February of 2015 resolution, while it did not call for a particular LEED certification, and as LEED, then there's LEED silver, then there's LEED gold, and then there's LEED platinum, and you get a certain number of points to get up to the different levels. The applicant had indicated that he was committed to get at a minimum of 50 points, but he was hopeful that he would get 60. It is one thing I should note for the public, and Mayor, you and I have discussed this, is that you actually don't know if you've gotten the number of LEED points, so you're actually finished with the project when someone in fact comes in and actually looks at what you've done. You have a proposal and you hope to reach those points, but at the end of the day, someone scores really where you come out. But the Planning Board's resolution from February of 2015 explicitly said that they were to follow the 2009 LEED requirements, which were then known as LEED Volume 3. LEED Volume 3, the 2009 proposals, are in fact no longer in effect. They are now LEED Volume 4, which went into effect in October of 2016. There are some changes between LEED 4 and LEED 3. I want to thank former Planning Board member John Fry, who was good enough to send me a, let's call it a crib sheet, which sort of goes through what some of those differences are. There's a much longer discussion, but there are certain differences with regard to sustainability of the site, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, environmental air quality, where the difference is in terms of the different categories and how you score it. So I've been in conversation with Hudson Steps attorney and Hudson Steps principal, Mr. Lieberman, who has been at some of the meetings, pointing out the fact that we are now under the 2016 LEED, and that whatever approvals come from the Planning Board will have to include the 2016 LEED. That's a matter that I also will have to discuss with the Planning Board, because when the Planning Board went into this, they were looking at the prior resolution. But the applicant has indicated he still intends to meet the requirements of getting hopefully at least 60 points, although as I said, the resolution called for a minimum of 50. The difference will be in terms of how it's now scored and exactly what those categories are. So that's something that has to be, I believe, worked out with the Planning Board in terms of specifically how that's done, and with the applicant, because if it's a different scoring system, one of the things I think that they will have to do is speak with their own, lead experts and their own architect to see exactly, how they're going to score that and what they're going to do. But we can't have the site plan based upon what is a no longer existent set of rules. So it has to be upon what's the current rules, which is the 2016 Volume 4. So that's something that will be looked at, and I expect I'll have some discussions with Planning Board members before next Tuesday, and continue my discussions with applicant and applicant's counsel as well.
Can you just clarify, the Planning Board decision has not yet been signed?
Hasn't even, to be honest, the person who writes the resolution, who you're talking with now, hasn't actually put that on the computer yet. But the answer is it has not been signed. The general process, so that folks understand, is the board votes at one meeting, and then the resolution is approved at the following meeting, which in the case of land use boards is 30 days later.
So what we have right now is an opportunity, as you draft the resolution,
Correct,
for you to be more specific in the details. So for example, if it was, in this instance, you can specify that it needs to, that it's consistent with the
2016
2016
volume
lead.
four. Correct.
Okay, okay.
Exactly right.
And so then this next topic, for, I don't know if it's appropriate for it to also be acknowledged
Well,
for the
the
planning
next
board.
topic that we discussed, and Trustee Bazemore, this goes to some of the things you were talking with me about last week, dealing with affordability of the particular units.
Okay.
The planning board resolution from February of 2015 makes specific reference to the 10% affordability, the 19 units that are being provided, which is required under our under Chapter 62 of the Village Code, which is the affordable housing, and pursuant to Section 270.23 of the code, which deals with this particular zone, they must provide the affordable housing pursuant to the requirements of Chapter 62. What the planning board resolution did not specifically provide, and when I say specifically, there's no reference to it, is in fact what area median income was in fact supposed to be the level. And if you go to Chapter 62, and I'm trying to look at it, and I'm actually looking at Chapter 270, so I'll do it from memory. Chapter 62, in fact, only mentions that the 80% is essentially a ceiling, but can be negotiated. What I suspect is that the planning board just, viewed it that it was going to be 80%, but never said anything. And I haven't looked at all the minutes to actually go over that, because the minutes go for a couple of years. But the reason I raised this, and as I said, I had some email discussions with Trustee Bazemore, is that there was nothing in the prior resolution dealing with AMIs. Specifically, what it talks about is they must meet the affordable housing requirements of Chapter 62, and that there would be 19 affordable units. That's specific that was in the proposal. Now, the section that they're looking for their density, as I said, does provide affordable housing. But if you go to the section that this board is really dealing with, which is the special permit, it does specifically say, in terms of determining a special permit, that the village board, in approving any special permit, shall require conformance to any supplementary requirements applying to such uses generally, and may establish such other conditions or limitations upon the use or characteristics of the use which are reasonably related to the public health, safety, and general welfare, as may be necessary to carry out the intent of this chapter. Now, so there are two different issues here. One is that the initial planning board resolution did not mention an area median income level. Area median income level is something that is subject to negotiation pursuant to our code. I will be honest, I have not seen any other development where, in fact, we have gone below 80% as part of a negotiation. In every planning board resolution I have read or looked at, it has always basically been, you follow Chapter 62, and it was always viewed as 10% housing at an 80% AMI. That said, it is within our code to do that, and there is at least an argument to be made, and it has not, and I want to preface this, it has not yet been raised with the applicant at all. So I think it's something that can also be discussed with the planning board next week as to what is their thought with regard to AMI on the one hand, or two, does this board want, as part of its special permit, to give some indication of where it thinks the AMIs should be for those 10 units. And I think that's important because clearly that will affect the finances of the applicant, because he's clearly based it, I am certain, on 10% at 80% AMI. I don't think there's any question that when he first started this back in 2011, he's been basing it on that. So if suddenly those numbers were thrown out, it would significantly impact what is already some issues with regard to financing now. But I point out that is there, and it is an issue. I think it is certainly something that in the future the planning board has to be more explicit on in terms of when they are approving site plans as to what that should be, and should be a discussion perhaps early on in the process. But in any event, it is the second of the two issues, Mayor, that we were going to talk about tonight.
And it's a very interesting discussion, and since it's born out of questions that you raised, Trustee Bazemore. Do you want to give us your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. So, one of the things to take into consideration is that the thing about the AMI is that it changes each year, right?
Correct.
So, this year the numbers are one thing, might be 118,000. Next year, the numbers could be, the annual median income of Westchester can be 120,000. I mean,
It is actually. I'm looking at the 2019.
Okay.
The 100% area median income is 120,000 for a family of four.
Okay.
About
So-
120 with 300.
so-
And you want me to give you the difference between 80% and 60%? Just people have in mind like
Yeah,
what that difference would be.
Okay. Yeah.
A family of four at 80% area median income is exactly what you said. It's just over 96,000. And if you go down to the 60% area median income, a family of four could be earning just over 72,000. That's a significant difference in the number of people that could access that housing.
So that being said, I mean, I think given the particular neighborhood, even I'm looking at 50%. Those numbers at
For a family of four at 50%, it's actually 60,000 for the 2019 numbers. Yeah, a single person would be all the way down to 42,000 for a single person at 50% area median.
that's my thought.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Tap in your pen.
Sorry.
You ready? Are you ready to say
No,
something?
no.
Who else wants to comment on this? Either procedurally, what our options are, or about the proposal that, I guess this is a proposal that Trustee Bazemore is putting out on the table, that as part of the special use permit that would be provided by this board, that we would require that the 10% set aside, that those 19 units, instead of being at the 80% area median income, which is the minimum required area median income in our existing code, which is what we know that the developer has had in mind for the many years that this project has been in development. So that's what all of their pro forma finances are based on, is the expectation of that they're going to be getting rents at the 80% area median income. So this would be a significant change. And there's justification for why we'd be allowed to do this, which is what Corporation Counsel was just speaking to. So do we want to include in our approval or consideration of approval for the special use permit that those 19 units would have to be, instead of 80% area median income, at 60 or even 50%?
I'm saying
That's
50.
the proposal, for 50.
I'm
That's
saying
your
50.
proposal. We don't have to decide it tonight, by the way, but this is the first in discussing it.
So, I have a few questions, I guess, and one of them is more a general question. We're talking about affordable housing and what we have on the code, which is obviously 80%, 10% set aside. We were talking about this particular project. This board passed a couple months back, months ago, a special permit for a different project, Hidden Cove.
Right.
Is anything on Hidden Cove in regarding to 80% IMI? And if that's the case, are we treating these two very, I don't want to say similar projects, but big projects, big developments that are happening in our village differently?
I'd have to go back and look at the Hidden Cove site resolution. I do not believe, other than the language that it must comply with affordable housing and that they mentioned the 10%, I don't think an AMI is set there. I would have to go back and look. I do understand your question, Trustee Quezada, and that was actually something that Trustee Bazemore and I were discussing via email. I know that when the board was at one point talking about certain issues with regard to that special permit, I understood it more to be dealing with the infrastructure issues in terms of water and sewer and things like that. But again, under Chapter 62, the 80% acts as a ceiling. So it is essentially subject to negotiation in any.
So I guess part of that discussion has to be more formative to our planning, in a sense, for them to understand what that 80% means. That's a different, and that will be a different discussion way that I would like we to have, or you to have, or Karen to have at this point, and what. That being said,
I think that's right, and I think that's also why I think that discussion is also one that needs to, going forward, be much earlier in the
correct.
process.
And I agree with you. So the second question that I have will be on Tel is, we did have set up a meeting with Hudson Steps last week, or where of that meeting happening. I was expecting to have questions in regards to what some of the topics we're talking about. I feel that, you know, we could have bring those issues up at that meeting if I was aware and what the direction would have been, because we could have some feedback on this in regards to what that meant, having a discussion with them in regards to this. That's something that actually we have talked about this in the past, about what that means affordable. We specific to Hudson Steps. I believe we had this conversation 2017, I believe, where we're talking about the IMIs and why this project didn't have lower percentage of that. So I'm a little surprised that that topic wasn't brought up before. It would have been an opportunity that I had, or you would have been part of this meeting that we had last week with them, and would have been very helpful for us to understand a little bit more on their end. How does that work? So I believe communication would have been a little more essential or more on time with. Me personally, I don't have a problem bringing that up in regards to the IMI. Not sure 50% work. You know, I know we talked about a lot of numbers in there. I have to see what that means and what can we. There's definitely, I don't have a problem with that. I don't know what the developer will say. You know, and so I'm sort of going to jump on part of the conversation. Stuart, if you can fill up the rest of the board and what the meeting was last Tuesday?
Right. If the board will remember, there was a discussion with regard to the $192,500 payment, which was for water infrastructure work that the village has already done. Since the meeting that Trustee Kazan and I were at, Mr. Lieberman has advised me that Ossining Land will pay to the village the full $192,500 at the time it applies for its first building permit for this project. Initially, or under the agreement, it had been that the payment would be made when the CO is issued. And we will now revise that agreement and make it that whoever ultimately gets this project will in fact have to pay at the time the initial building permit is issued, in as much as the village in fact has already done the work.
And something that Stuart and I talked about that, it was in regards to, because in the past they have done 2 building permits, one for the renovation of the historic house, Smith Robinson, and the other one for the major project, so to speak. And one of the things that I had asked Stuart if it's a way for us to tie this into, hopefully, the first building permit that they will pull is to the renovation of the historic house. So then we'll have some sort of leverage to get our money back that we have already, you know, use it for this particular project. So, not sure if you have drafted that
I'm in the
letter.
process of doing that, but as I said, he has agreed that when he applies for that first permit, they will pay that. What his expectation is that once the approvals are all there, he will then have his financing in order, and when they close, part of that closing will include a payment to the village of the $192,500.
Now, and also in that meeting, there was discussions in regards to some additional documents that they need to provide in regards to site plan that our engineer and our consultant needs to review.
Yes, that they're going to provide. I should point out that they have not yet provided the required documents to the building department for the demolition permit. As you folks know, there was a revision list provided by the building inspector, I think June the 5th, if I'm not mistaken. And those documents have not yet been provided, at least as of this afternoon. If I had different news, I would have given it to you. But so far, they're waiting for an updated Con Ed letter, an updated letter from the exterminator, how they're going to do dust control. Once they have all that information to the building inspector, they will be able to issue the demo permit. But to date, they have not gotten that information.
So I briefly want to respond to you, Trustee Casada. With my email exchange with Stewart, my understanding, particularly with respects to the last project, me and Stewart had a verbal conversation about affordable housing. Last project, we don't really recall the same conversation, so I didn't really think that that this was actually possible until I raised it. Had I had the information that I have now, by all means, would have been something that at the meeting. That being said, we have had ample conversation about affordable housing over the last 4 years.
On this project.
On this project and just in general, right? So I would hope that even with me not being here, right, that is something that we as a board, even in my absence, that's a conversation that we're having. Last year we had a whole conversation about the affordable housing law, and particularly about at 80% of the area median income, 2018 numbers, that 2 bedrooms will be running at $2,100. For me personally, there is no way I can, in good conscience, ever push forward a project when we're providing affordable housing at a 2 bedroom at $2,100. Again, now that we've had a conversation about our code and what that actually means as far as up to 80%. Now we have a better understanding of what this actual law means, and maybe if we had better clarification years prior, then maybe the village could have made other decisions. I just want to.
I agree with you. No, and that's something that, again, when this particular project brought up pilot idea, that was something that we had discussed as well, and affordability. So
I was waiting for that word. Trustee Levin, welcome. What would you like to add to this conversation about Hudson Step? You've been quiet so far.
In agreement with what's being said. The question is, do we want this developed or not? Because what's the right number, regardless of what we may think is the right number for someone who's already worked through some of the financing? Has that all lined up? Can they redo all that work and still get financing with this sort of economic model? I have no idea. I don't have the answer to that. But it's, that's what sort of caught my attention. Not whether it should be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I know what we would like it to be, but if we want this to move forward, I don't know what they're able to do, because it requires them to totally undo and redo their financing and models, which is not an easy thing to do. I always thought that once things are in the pipeline or on their way, you sort of can't change the game on people. If we can, that's fine. My thought is, once it's this far along, what is it that we're actually, I know what we can do legally, but will we get this thing off the ground if we keep doing this? If we do this, I don't know. I just don't have the answer to that. So I'm a little bit lost because I don't actually know, what the issue is.
So is there a way, because obviously the applicant is not even aware of this conversation that we're having now, sure, until
we'll be after this.
Of course, they will be there tomorrow. But I guess it's sort of question to Stuart and question to the board is there something that, if they're going to the planning board next week, that's on a Tuesday. Our work session is on a Wednesday. So either or, this conversation is going to happen. So my question is, I guess, to the board, is it something that we want to discuss with them at a work session, or we want to set up a meeting with them, let them know what anticipation will be for Tuesday at the planning board, or then what anticipation will be for put a clause within the special permit.
Well, it sounds like my understanding from Stuart is that any discussion of specifying the AMI at a lower percentage than had been anticipated would be up to this board as part of the special use permit. It didn't sound like that was something that would likely be integrated into the approval from the planning board next Tuesday. Is that
Right,
correct?
But I do want to make one point. It's technically not on the agenda for the planning board next week. What would be on would be to just have the
The work
resolution
session.
signed.
Got it.
But given that there are the issues of lead, I may have a discussion with the planning board, but it's actually not an agenda item in the sense that
Okay.
we're having people come back. I do think, Trustee Levin's point is one that's really well taken, because these folks have been developing this since, I think, when they bought it in 2013, 2012. And we're now, 6, 7 years after the fact. And I'm sure, as we all say it here, they based it on 80%. So, to essentially tell them to throw their blackboard out is kind of, is difficult. But, and I understand the issue, there have been discussions. That does not preclude just talking to them and saying, this is really what the board has been talking about, and to see where they are. But I just point out that I'm sure, we've never seen, I've never asked them specifically, but if I'd had a at the house, I'd say it certainly was based on 80%.
The last time I recall having a conversation with Hudson Step about having a lower AMI was when they came to us for a pilot.
Okay.
And at that point, they had their approvals in place. So we were not in a position to attach any different expectation to a special use permit or anything else. All of that lapsed. So everything now needs to go through the process again. Would it have been ideal to have this conversation, at the beginning of our consideration of the special use permit? Absolutely. Or sooner than that, at the beginning of the planning board and land use consideration. That would have been better, but when you know better, you do better. Here we are. So when we had the conversation, when they came to us for the pilot the last time, there was some initial discussion of a negotiation, because a pilot is a payment in lieu of taxes. And when a community recognizes that it would be beneficial for there to be a development in their community, that it would benefit the community in some larger way than just a developer being profitable, then it may be warranted for us to allow the developer to get a break on their taxes during the time that they're building the building, during the time that they're leasing up, and perhaps even for a few years in the initial usage and rental of the building. How long that may be is a negotiation. The determining entity, taxing entity, for whether or not a pilot is granted is the Village of Ossining working with the county IDA. We also communicate with the other taxing entities in Ossining and ask them for their input. When Hudson Step came to us and asked for a pilot, I believe it was 2 years ago, we went to the school district, we went to the town, we went to the library. Those are the other taxing districts. There was very, very, very strong objection by the schools and the town. I don't believe the library weighed in writing in the same manner. Some of us on the board would have been willing to have a conversation about how we might negotiate a pilot that was a little less exhaustive and lengthy than had been proposed, but that might allow them to get through the, have the tax break during the time they're building it and leasing up, more consistent with the last pilot of this nature that we agreed to, which was for Harbor Square. At that time, they gave a little bit, as I recall, a little bit of movement, and maybe a handful of units would be at 60, but it was nothing like all 19 at a lower area median income. But frankly, we never got very far down that path, because the village was the only board where any of us were willing to consider it, and so the negotiation never went very far. At this point, it's not so much a negotiation as, well, I suppose it's a conversation to have, but the village is in a position to determine what would be an appropriate consideration to attach to the approval of the special use permit, which allows them the greater density. They could just, I assume they could just say, forget it. Not only do we not want to have the lower area median income, we'll just forego the special use permit, and then they'd get less density, so they'd have fewer units. Is that correct?
If they decided to forego That's exactly right. They would just go back to the standard density allowed under the PWB zone.
Now, let me just ask you, from a legal perspective, it's been brought up that this is a different consideration than we've had for other developments in the past. Most recently, the Brandreth Hill Factory proposal and Hidden Cove, which is a similarly large development. And this consideration was, we never even raised this question or thought about it because it hadn't occurred to us. We didn't realize this was an option. At least most of us didn't realize it was an option at the time. Are we opening ourselves up to, are we exposing ourselves to litigation for not following in the same, did we set a precedent that we now need to follow, or does every development come to us and be considered on its own terms, and it is absolutely in our power to determine what is the best and wisest path forward for this development at this time in our community?
I view the situation here as different than if someone comes before the zoning board and is looking for an area variance and says, well, you gave the same exact variance to the house next door, because it's very, it's critical that you can't basically change what you've done unless there is a significant change in circumstances. The point I want to make is it certainly is correct that in the prior project, this issue was not, let's say, fully vetted. But it's also clear that our code explicitly says that 80 is your ceiling, and it is a negotiable number. And unlike in the zoning situation where these are the factors you have to get an area variance. You either meet those factors or you don't meet those factors. Here, it's, do you get that number? They could come back and say, listen, there's simply no way that we can do this at 80, anything below 80%. We just can't. Our numbers don't work. But that doesn't mean that the board, can't do it. I will say this. For $270, you can start a litigation in New York State courts. So anybody can sue for anything for any reason. That said, I think that if that were their argument, I think that that's probably not a strong argument for them to go on.
Well, I want to sort of piggyback on what was said before. So now, if we do open this conversation, this dialogue with them, asking in regards to this, going back to 2 years ago when they said, look, we need a pilot to make this project happen. Are we saying that we are willing, or we have an idea to entertain? Because they can come back and say, great, we'll do 50%, we'll do 40%, we'll do any percentage of this as long as you guys take in consideration a pilot for us. Is that what we're saying?
I don't know that can be tied into the special use permit, but I think what you're saying is consistent with what this board has said, which is a pilot shouldn't be granted for somebody just complying with the bare minimum of our local law. A pilot should very much be considered when a developer goes above and beyond the bare minimum to help us achieve our greater goals, in this case, affordability. Is that a reasonable statement that everybody can support? I see Karen is nodding her head.
I think that's a consideration, because regardless of whether you, the need for affordable housing notwithstanding, because we know that's a serious need, but the model the model being built is luxury housing. So when you're subsidizing in luxury housing, your cost is, you're subsidizing pools and gyms and underground garages. So your ability to make the numbers work is compromised by the fact that your building costs are going to be high because you're building for high end, and that is what this project is. So if you want to maximize affordability, typically, you would have to incentivize that in some way, and that's usually done through a pilot.
Or they could buy out.
The other things that you could do, so you're, at 10%, you're still talking 19 units. So there are other ways you could look at a buyout that could then be used to seed another tax credit project where you can get 60, 40, 60, 80 units of 30% to 80% area median income in another area. So there's different ways to look at it. So the the set aside is one tool to create a range of affordability. It's not, it's certainly not going to build your way out of an affordable housing crisis. So those are things that I know that we looked at in the past. I'm not sure right now if the nature of the buyout allows you to, how you can reinvest that money, but in terms of,
I know we raised the number on the buyout.
That's 350, I believe, right?
so,
Okay.
but there's other things you can do. I'm not saying that there wouldn't necessarily need to be other processes put in place to facilitate that, but there are other ways to look at creating a range of housing in a creative way.
Okay, go ahead.
No, so I think to me is, and I'm going to agree part of what Rika mentioned before. This project is pretty much, I want to say, 3/4 of the way there with all the approvals. We have the planning ready to sign a resolution for next week. We have zoning to sign a resolution within 2 weeks, I believe. Stuart?
Zoning's resolution was signed.
Was signed.
Was signed.
Okay. So, and that resolution has 6 months
Correct.
life expectancy, so to speak. The planning is
But
about
that
a,
also has remember, that also has the 30-day clause
Correct.
in it that they have to come back if they have
So-
not secured the building.
correct. So, and the planning resolution is about how long?
Planning,
The
planning,
year?
the site plan approval is, I believe it's 1.5 years because of the value of the project.
So, if this conversation, the board wants to have this conversation with this particular developer, then it needs to happen now. That's the case, because I'm assuming this developer has to go back and start. So, and if the zoning resolution is already 6 months, this particular project may not, if the developer wants to even entertain this conversation, he has less than 6 months to get this thing.
Okay.
That's the way I'm
Yeah,
looking
no,
at it.
let's just take a recap of where we are logistically and on our calendar, because next week, my understanding is there will be 3 members of the board present at the work session. So, and not including Trustee Bazemore, you're not going to be there next week, and this was your proposal. So not the best meeting for us to continue this conversation. And Trustee Levin, you're going to be out next week as well. But there could be some conversations next week with the developer to talk about everything we've discussed here, including the very interesting consideration that was just brought up by Manager DeTore, which is the areas where we might be able to negotiate is, look, this is what we'd like to get. We'd like to get more affordability. There's different ways to approach that and to succeed in a way that could really benefit the community. And so that's a conversation to be had that could be had with 1 or 2 members of the board of trustees and our staff with the applicant. And perhaps that could be set up for next week.
Just let me know, that's fine.
Okay, because the week after that is July 4th week. A lot of people will be out of town. We don't have a public meeting. And then our next meeting, where I think we will have 5 board members, will be our July 10th work session. Is that true? July 10th?
Yep.
Okay, at least 4 of us are committing to be there on July 10th. So that might be the next time we can have a public discussion, and at that point, see where we are with these conversations about how to get more affordability in this development. And I just also want to make the point, while they have never considered anything below 80% area median income in their pro forma, they have also said a number of times they cannot go out for financing until they have the approvals. They do not have their financing ready to go. So they are waiting for the approval so they can get their financing. So there's no existing financing that's being jeopardized. They've been asked if they're planning to ask for a pilot, and there hasn't been a clear response to whether or not they were planning to ask for a pilot. And the last time they asked for a pilot, it was very late in the game. So us having this conversation now, it would have been better to have it 6 months ago, but it's not an unreasonable time to have it because the approvals are not finalized. They haven't even started going out for their financing. So then is the sense of the board that we would like Stuart to reach out to the applicant to schedule a meeting for next week?
Fine with me.
All right, and 1 or 2 of us that are available to attend?
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
New business of the board. Climate adaptive designs?
why don't we do that
Yes,
one
it's
first?
already in here. Oh, do we have more than one? I'm forgetting.
I had the policy that I had.
Yeah.
Oh,
circulated
yes,
to
yes, yes,
everybody.
yes, 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 the camp
Which is
policy.
actually a time-sensitive issue.
Okay, whichever you'd like to do first.
Why don't we do the resolution since?
Okay.
Sure. Climate adaptive design studio support of a letter of interest. Resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Austin authorizes the Town of Austin Supervisor's Office to submit a letter of interest to the New York State Hudson River Estuary Program to become a host community for Cornell University's Climate Adaptive Design Studio for the fall 2019 semester. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, let's have some comments on this because we haven't actually discussed it publicly. Thank you very much, Manager Dottori, for forwarding it to this. And we really want to thank Supervisor Levenberg and her team for finding this and going after it, because what it is it's, well, you can explain it in more detail because I think you may have discussed it in your previous life with the town perhaps. But it would really be particularly beneficial to the village because we have so much coastline on the Hudson River, and this would help us plan for the future. So, Madam Manager, do you want to fill us in any more on this? And then I think there might be a couple questions on the board.
This is a program that if we're selected, we would have access to Cornell University's adaptive climate people to look at our whole entire waterfront from Sing Sing all the way down to the Croton River, and really look at it in terms of what could be done to make sure that we do the most we can for climate resiliency. So this could be a range of different things, and so the way it works is if we're selected for this, we would have representatives from town and village who would commit to provide site visits and existing information on what we have on the village and townal parcels on the waterfront, and then recommendations would be made. So what's really great about this is it's not really a heavy lift, and it's a way to get more information and just more resources potentially for things we can do to thwart climate change and make sure that whatever we do going forward, we're as resilient as possible. Although it's not guaranteed that we'll even get this, but just participating in this, getting our name out there, sort of puts us on the map for these types of resources. Other communities that have been selected for this, it did open them up for other grant opportunities. So it's really, there's certainly no downside, and it's a good way to make sure that we're, really exploring all options and resources we have to mitigate climate change against our very beautiful and precious waterfront.
You had a couple of questions?
I did. I have a couple of questions and a comment. So I read through and I actually looked at the video. So thanks for forwarding it. So it's really interesting. I am all in support of it. This our waterfront and the Hudson River in of itself is a unique body of water, actually. And I think there needs to be more attention paid. It seems that when people don't pay attention, bad things happen. So I think any opportunity to understand how to better manage the waterfront is great. I've mentioned before that Cornell has a really superior program in environmental studies, botanical studies, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that when I read, I got all the way down to the end and saw the people that were representing town and village. I had actually called the mayor and said, let's make sure that we get, maybe there should be somebody from EAC on there, maybe. So the people that represent and should be involved, maybe it should be a board member, maybe there's a recommendation, is it staff, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's my question, because I leave it to you and the mayor, if you want me to be on it, that's great. I'm very interested in this topic, but maybe it should be somebody new to one of our many boards so that it opens them up to government and how things work. So just keep,
Right.
I'll let you deal with that. And I'm fine with the people that were on there, by the way. Great
Okay.
people. So however you want to do, but there should be, I think, deeper representation. So that's one thing. I'm going to be very careful in how I say this, but I do want to continue to push us to involve our teens and our youth, especially the minority youth, who should have access and opportunities when these things are presented to us, not just as grants, but for somebody in the high school to actually work on this, to first of all be notified about it somehow, because none of them sit here, and I doubt they're looking at this exciting video from this evening. And really, I know,
think it's pretty
hard
exciting.
to believe. When you work on these type of things in high school, you have a much higher probability of getting into a school like Cornell by working on projects like this. You have a much higher probability of understanding what's available. Part of Cornell has a state part to it that is far cheaper, has scholarships, and we need to connect projects, not just for future grants for our village, but to include people in our high school in a material well, not because they're doing the Regeneron project or they're the smartest kid in science, but to give them access to this project. So maybe having somebody, and again, I leave it to you because I am not actually sure. Besides calling Ray Sanchez and saying, hey, this is great, but I've been sitting on this seat for a while and I'm still sort of trying to figure out how to connect the dots, because this is how futures are made for kids in our high school. These kind of projects. I could feel it already, and it doesn't have to be one kid. It could be 2 to 3 kids. I actually think, if I'm not mistaken, that Paul had a Cornell kid with the water department on what?
Summer intern.
A summer intern from Cornell now who lives in our community. I think town outside, I don't think it's the village. Nevertheless, great on the resume, opened up, he is flying high. So there's also an opportunity to look at who graduated last year, or even the graduating class of this year who might already be at Cornell. I am just pushing for some help here to get the kids involved in this who are interested in environmental studies or any of this stuff, because it's in our backyard. It's going to be in our backyard probably for a couple of years, I would assume this is going to be going on. So I'm sort of begging for help here.
Okay.
There is a particular person to talk to, and it would be the teacher who's for many years taught environmental science. And in fact, I only know this because I'll put on my documentary discussion series hat for a minute. Our April presentation was about citizen scientists who are working from, Artie Carlucci is the teacher, his class of environmental science students who spend the summer testing the water quality and
Right.
providing those results to Riverkeeper.
Yeah, they're always at Earth Day
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah, it's really a special thing that we have in our community, and so what you're suggesting is taking that one step further, and it's something that is ingrained with our community's culture. So I think that would be a great outreach to make, and invite any student from that program to be part of this process and these conversations while it goes on, assuming we get the award. All we're doing tonight is saying that we're willing to sign the letter.
Yeah.
Right?
I know.
So we're a couple of steps ahead,
That's
but
where we are right now, but we're always optimistic, and it doesn't hurt to start thinking about what we'll do when we get the award.
okay.
So was there a motion? So was there a so move?
Uh,
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Did we move?
I don't
didn't-
think we
did we move?
motion, actually.
Yes.
Okay.
Montel and Mika.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
that's right. Sorry.
Next up, sir.
Oh, okay, thank you, Anne Marie. I had circulated earlier to you folks a policy regarding immunizations at our summer camp, with specific reference to the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella, and what this village should, what the rec department should or should not do. The proposal or the policy that I have proposed is that those campers and staff who are either unvaccinated or under-vaccinated should not be allowed into camp. If this is, again, specifically with regard to MMR. And I should point out for the public, when I'm referring to under-vaccinated for MMR, that's, you're supposed to have 2 doses. However, we do have a preschool camp where we have children who are too young to have had their 2nd dose. I'm not including those children in the under-vaccinated, But I should point out, as the county's Department of Health has pointed out, if there is a case of measles in the camp or in the immediate vicinity, all those people who are either unvaccinated or undervaccinated will not be permitted back until the Department of Health gives the all clear, which would be at least 21 days. So, but the view is a couple of things. First is this board, as I made the board aware, the governor last week signed legislation amending the state's public health law, removing the religious exemption for immunizations. And that's for all immunizations that are required for school-age children. That's the important thing to note there. It doesn't deal with camps, but my view is that the policy would extend it. And that religious exemption was removed. What was kept was the medical exemption. So if there is some reason or some medical reason that the student or child is unable to receive that vaccination, the physician can provide a letter, and that would be acceptable and would still be acceptable under the policy proposed here. But what we're talking about then are unvaccinated and undervaccinated. And what I'm advised by Rec Superintendent Bill Garrison is that we have one staff member who has claimed a religious exemption and is unvaccinated. We have two staff members who say that they have had the full doses but have not been able to produce the records. With regard to campers, we have two campers with a religious exemption. We have another cohort of campers who we have been unable to confirm that they did or did not. We have a few who are undervaccinated, but according to Bill, and this was at about 5:20 this afternoon, we have at least 30 outstanding immunization records for campers, which may just be delinquent or we do not have records. So that could be an additional number of campers that are there, something they are trying to track down. The county health department does require immunization records, and that is something that we keep. But through June the 13th, there are, as I wrote in here, 1,049 reported cases of measles in the United States. The vast majority are in New York State, and of those, they're either in New York City or in Rockland County. Just to compare, last year there were a total of 320 cases nationwide. The year before there were 120 cases nationwide. So the numbers are going up at a very rapid rate. The thought is that if someone is either unvaccinated or undervaccinated, the proposal of the policy would be that those individuals should not be allowed to attend. With regard to the issue of any religious exemptions, I should point out, and I sent this to you folks earlier, Newcastle does not permit a religious exemption. Yorktown will accept a religious exemption. Hastings will not accept a religious exemption. Irvington will accept, but only if they have a doctor's note that says the child is in good health. Briarcliff will accept, will still accept a religious exemption. Pound Ridge will not. So it's sort of all over the board there. But again, the policy that I have proposed, I've discussed it with Bill Garrison, I've discussed it with Karen, is that for those folks, those campers and staff who are either unvaccinated or undervaccinated, unless they can come in and demonstrate that they have gotten their, in the case of undervaccinated, their second dose, or unvaccinated, have the first dose and are going to get that second dose fairly rapidly, they should not be permitted into the camp. Because, and this again only is referring to the MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. I'm not referring to any of the other immunizations. If you look at the state law, there's a slew of them. As the mayor sent around a note earlier, and I had referred to it, there is a vaccine schedule that is out, which is multicolored and has all the different ones that are on there and all the different ages. But
all you're talking, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, because I'm realizing now, as you pointed out, this is, what you're suggesting is something very specific, just for the MMR because of the current concern about measles.
Correct. I did not
Because
extend
what I
this.
provided was much more broad, which is what the school is generally saying now.
Right,
Okay.
and the way the public health law is written now, and with the amendment, if a student comes into school without the vaccine card, they're allowed to stay in school for 14 days to basically get everything up to date. If they've demonstrated that they have transferred either from another state or another location, the principal can actually extend that up to 30 days for them to get there. But I'm only talking here about MMR. I'm not talking about diphtheria, pertussis, or all the others that might come in there. Just MMR because of the prevalence of measles recently. I recognize that, for some folks, it's tough to necessarily find the vaccination records. What the health department has recommended is if you can't find the vaccination records, get vaccinated. Real simple. It's the best way to say it. Just
There's a
do it.
mother sitting next to you who's thinking about revaccinating your child with all of those shots.
Nope.
Find your records.
And if you're an adult and you don't know, or if you're an adult unlike me who fits into the age group where you don't have to worry, get a titer, and if your titer shows that you need to have the shot, get the shot. So I think on the one hand, we're talking about the MMR shot, and we also, again, have a very, very, very small cohort of folks who have claimed a religious exemption. As I've indicated, that religious exemption is no longer valid for immunizations going to school. It's my proposal that it not be considered valid with regard to going to camp as relates, and I'm specifically here talking to MMR. That's the one that we're looking at.
Okay.
And that's
So-
the policy.
So
I'm
is
looking
the policy that you recommended is what you have underlined here in the memo to us?
Well,
Policy
actually what I have underlined is really what Dr. Amsler had there on page 2. I recommend that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's it.
Which for the benefit of the public, do we need to read that?
I'll read it for everybody. Yeah, sure. You can't see page 2. I recommend that a policy be instituted whereby all staff and campers must have the age-appropriate doses of the MMR vaccine prior to starting camp. Campers and staff who are unvaccinated or undervaccinated should not be allowed to attend camp until proof of vaccination is provided unless a medical exemption from a licensed physician is provided.
So it's interesting to me that you combine staff and the campers. That's unusual. I mean, we just did one for where I work because we run camps similar to our community center. And we separate staff from campers, mostly because the question also becomes with staff, and if they're not vaccinated, what are you doing with them? Are you sending them home? I mean, you can send a camp and say, I'm sorry to a camper, it's that's the policy, but what are you doing with a staff person
Can't
if
work.
they're not? So
We
we're
won't be able
paying
to
them, but we're going to pay them.
I,
So they can't work in the camp or they can't work in the village.
they cannot work at the camp. They're being hired as a camp counselor. They cannot
So
work.
these are the camp counselors.
Correct. Well, I can tell you this, all of the senior staff have all their vaccinations.
Okay, so because it doesn't say that. It just says, okay, so these are actually camp counselors. Okay.
So, Trustee Levin, I just want to let you know there are some employers who will let you go because you have not been properly vaccinated. I can tell you right now where I
Let you
work.
go meaning fire you?
Yeah. So, well, this is what I'll say. You will be locked out of being able to clock in you will be locked out in being able to clock in. So, if you can't clock in, you can't get paid. So, I can tell you where I work. I had to get a titer because
Yep.
if I didn't get the titer.
Same here. So, I mean, it's interesting that you just put it together because we didn't do that, and there was a reason for that, and mostly because we don't like to fire people.
Well,
But I understand. I think there's also the issue of the health department actually coming in, and so I always look at these things that we live in communities, and one person can infect an entire group of people. But actually, the health department will not only close down this camp, it will actually close down a bunch of places within a certain mileage. If I read some of the health department, I mean, it's a big deal.
Well,
It's
Dr.
not as simple like our camp. It's going to affect lots of people.
Dr. Amler, who's the health department commissioner for the county, in her May letter said understand that you need to be prepared for the fact that
Right.
if you get an outbreak, it may actually require your camp to close.
Yeah, no.
Because you may have staff and you may have, so that's just, that's unfortunately a fact, and they make that very clear. Bill Garrison, who speaks to various other rec superintendents and also, folks who work with the health department, says it's expected there'll be a much closer observation by the health department sanitarians. Well, they already look at it very carefully, but given what's been going on, they're going to be looking at the records and the immunization records even more carefully this year.
I mean, I'm personally in support of this. I'm glad the governor did what he did, and I think there are a lot of issues also with homeschool kids and records, and there's also a movement about the vaccination. So it's a tough political, actually, issue. So I'm in support of what you wrote. I just had questions about the staff, but now that I understand it's actually counselors, it feels a little different for me. So
Yeah, well,
I'm good
I don't
with
think
it.
counselors have the same type of protections that a DSTA
Right,
full-time
and-
employee
and
would
staff,
have. So.
And staff here was really camp staff.
Yeah,
That's,
okay.
I'm not
But
talking someone who works.
it's a different
rec department.
conversation.
So that's, yeah.
Okay. So do we need to vote on this, or
If
we
it- if
vote
it's-
on the policy?
If it's a sense of the board that that policy is acceptable, then, we'll let Bill Garrison know that he can go forward.
I
with
think
it.
so. Yes, I think everyone is supportive of
Okay.
what you read makes a lot of sense. So
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you, folks.
We are going to have exec.
What?
I was just looking at the clerk because I forgot to talk to you before because we didn't write it in here.
Okay,
Did you want me to write it in?
No, I'll just say it. out
okay.
loud. We're gonna.
Well, we have visitor recognition first.
Oh yes. Of course. My mistake.
Is there anyone here who wishes to address the board?
Yes, I would.
Welcome.
Linda A. Many years ago, I got a police report in the mail, and it said that I found bunny rabbits on Spring Street. Spoke to Chief Burton. I said I wasn't here. I was in Mount Kisco getting a parking ticket. He corrected the police report. I'm going to jump around. Here's a ticket. I stress to all of you, the tickets are being written incorrectly. It's one sample I have. It's missing the state. It's missing the make of the car. It's missing the body type. It was issued on 03. 03. No month, no year. On Aris Place, ARIS. And it was it says expired, no inspection, but there's no box. Please, people, teach the police officers how to write these out, because we're losing $900 a week the way I estimate it. And this bothers me. There's errors in the police tickets, multitude. Okay, getting back to an erroneous police report. In the late evening on February 12th, my neighbor accidentally hit my car. Came into my home on November 13th. I'm sorry, I mean to say February 15th. His name was Benjamin Proctor at 2 Walden, and we decided I'd file a police report. Here's a copy of the police report. I went in and I saw Officer Pavone. And he writes description, MVA, motor vehicle accident in the past. This happened less than 12 hours earlier, so I can't grasp what he means in the past. It's got my name, but it's got no address on it, and I provided my driver's license. What else he spent time with me from 16.55 to 16:55. I said, I'd like a police report. He says, what's your neighbor's license plate number? I don't have it, but you got the machines. You could pull it up. The way I can go to PVB and get a plate. I didn't have the gentleman's plate. He says, okay, call me up. So here it says associated numbers, persons involved. Linda A, and my last name, my address, my phone number. Then it says second person, Linda Mangano. Where's Benjamin Proctor's name? It's not here. Okay, so the accident was on the late evening of February 12th, and I reported to the police less than 12 hours later on February 13th. And I'm told, and I repeat, Pavone will never get in trouble because he's the chief's best friend.
Thank you, Linda.
I am really upset with this.
Thank you, Linda.
You want to tell me that was 4 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes? Oh, I'm
For the
saying one
recognition
more
is 3
thing.
minutes.
There is a lie on this report, and I don't like it. I wrote to the chief to correct it,
You identified that earlier. Thank you.
but why wasn't it corrected?
I don't have any insights to be able to address that.
So
Thank
if
you.
the cops are writing out tickets so incorrectly, anybody who deals with this local police department, I would urge them, get a copy of the police report because it's probably as screwed up as the parking tickets.
Thank you.
Really mean that?
I'm always grateful to hear from members of the community. Thank you for coming and caring
Grateful
so
to
much
hear
about
from
us.
me. You know you'd rather not see me.
Well,
Sorry, Kevin.
We can
Raven
talk
wa-
later. Does anybody else
Raven
have
wasn't
any
here to
comments?
tap you on the shoulder
for visitor
to tell you
recognition?
Megano's coming.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak about a topic of general interest to the community for 3 minutes? All right. Then can we have a motion to adjourn to executive session for matters of personnel related to specific persons and for matters of real property?
I'll move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. With that, thank you very much for joining us. Remember, next Tuesday, June 25th, is an election day. It is Democratic election primary, so anybody who's a registered Democrat, please go to your regular polling place and you will have the opportunity to vote for county judge. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.